back into it. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Nui o te ahi everybody. So we are here now, and the heritage rate into the general rate, and I'll hand over to Russell to work us through that.
Thanks very much, Bede, and good afternoon, everyone. So just for a bit of context, I thought we actually have 3 heritage rates. We have a special heritage rate called Art Centre, and that's to fund $5.5 million over 3 years and recover the cost over 10 years. We have a special heritage rates Cathedral, and the purpose of that was to fund $10 million grant supporting the restoration of the Anglican Cathedral. And we have a heritage targeted rate, and the purpose of that was to fund $23.5 million towards the Canterbury Museum and planned expenditure of another $53.5 million for the provincial chambers, the old municipal chambers, and the Robert McDougall Gallery. This is the one that I'm dealing with this afternoon. As part of developing the LTP, staff were challenged to find savings, cost reductions in any which way we could, and this particular rate came into sight along those lines. So the proposal is, and staff recommendation is, that the heritage rate be moved into the general rate because the timing of the rate repayments doesn't really align with the repayment of the loans. The repayment of the loans are over 30 years. The rate was at the front end, it was smaller to keep because there was rates increases in the year, and it was introduced in 2021-22, and so the suggestion is, one, we have a saving of 0.29% in year 1, but also it aligns the expenditure of the repayment of the loans as the construction costs go. So some construction costs have already commenced, some have yet to commence. But like other capital projects, they're funded by debt over the term of when the construction starts. So that's what would happen in this space. So, as per staff advice, the rates reduction in the short term, rating in advance of debt servicing requirements, which isn't necessary. The rate doesn't represent all the heritage costs. So like I said, it's just those 4 buildings. No, not just, but it's those 4 significant buildings, but it's just for the capital costs. It doesn't cover the interest costs in that. So there's other heritage costs as well, and also including in the other 2 rates that I outlined. We had a number of questions that came through, and I won't read those out, but they were answered in the slide in front of you. So like I say, the staff advice is for simplification and for transparency, well, not pointing the wrong message in that this is for all heritage when it's not. So look, I'm happy to take any questions on this matter, Mr. Mayor.
Victoria.
So can you help me understand the history of this? Is this another example of reinventing the wheel where we've previously had it as part of a general rate and then taken it out and done a targeted rate, and now we're putting it back in again? Is this another one of those?
Mm-hmm. I think, Russell, were you here? At the time it was seen as a good idea, but history's told us that it's not. Do you want to...
That's correct, Mary. At the time, it was seen, okay, let's put some money into those buildings that I outlined, the museum, the Robert McDougall, the municipal changes, and the provincial building. Let's restore those and call it a targeted rate, a heritage targeted rate, and go with that. And the amounts were fixed, like 23.5 for the Canterbury Museum and 53.5 for those other 3 buildings. But it has, as well as presenting an opportunity to reduce rates in year 1, look, to be honest, as far as the team goes, it is a complex thing to administer behind the scenes as well, because its structure is just so different to any other rate that we have.
So again, it just appears to be changing like the wind, and I think it would be helpful for us to understand what was the advice that was received at the time that we made the decision to make it a targeted rate, so that we can actually understand what has changed.
I think
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it wasn't in the general rate to start off with. It was a new rate that was started in 2021.
so Sam, you were here.
Sorry.
I think it might have been a public perception thing at the time, around potentially looking like we were doing something in a particular area.
But isn't it still a public perception thing?
To
Well,
my memory, but we'll check, it wasn't staff
probably something about
advice
later.
at the time. Well, we didn't advise against it, it came from the floor of the council.
Yeah, might be
So
something.
there won't be a report on it to my memory, but we will search back.
Sam,
Oh, it was just more around, in terms of baking in as we currently had, it makes sense because I don't recall any submissions or anything like that. It was sort of, everyone just took it as a, makes sense to reincorporate it. So we probably don't want to spend too much time on it.
Andre, then Yanni.
I encouraged Jake to jump in. I thought he made a very good point last week. It sort of was intended, it seems like it was intended a number of years ago to provide clarity, but it seems to have achieved the opposite. So, yeah, I support moving it to the general rate.
So generally, sorry, Yanni, you had a question.
Some of the submitters talked about looking at a levy. I just wondered if we've had any meetings with MPs around the idea of setting up a heritage levy, a bit like we've got for the museum, particularly for the provincial building, which is actually a regional facility. So it seems inherently unfair that we are tasked with finding the funding and having some sort of levy, and whether that could include the Arts Centre. So I know we won't be able to do that work for the LTP right now, but it does seem to me that that was something that people did raise, which would be quite sensible to look at going forward, if we could.
Okay. So just for my daft head, the heritage, the cathedral one's $10 million. We've practically collected it all, so that's sort of over and out to a certain extent. The Arts Centre one is 5.5 million, which we've already given them. So we've borrowed this money, and plus the 23 million for the museum. Is that, we've borrowed all this dough, and this is just repaying it. Is that, am I?
The 23 million, I think, or the amounts are going to be paid out over the next 3 years. It's sort of in 3 instalments, in 25, 26 and 27, and I think it's slightly more than that now, isn't it?
Yes, the costs have increased a bit, so we're probably looking around 27 million at this point over the next 3 years. Yeah.
Sorry, now this is where I'm... The 23 mil for heritage stuff, it will... When we need it, we'll borrow it. We haven't borrowed it yet.
Correct. As we
But the targeted rate is in tow now, quietly building up a reserve or whatever.
Well, that's correct. I mean, in the first year, I think it was to keep rates down. It was a small amount, around about $70,000. I just can't put my hand on the piece of paper I'd like. So it wasn't, and then built up over time. So the current year, it's about 2.6 million, and it will continue like that for the next 27 years to collect the $77 million in total that we will collect. Yeah.
Okay. So
but we borrow it as we need it.
As you need it.
Yes.
Yeah, but the targeted rate is in train now. Correct. Right. Can you just go back to the previous page, please? So if we do this, it's just for everyone out there watching it, is $2.03 million a year. Is that, have I got that right?
In the current year, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, just the current year.
So over time, of course, you know, that the cost of repaying the loan and with the targeted rate would catch up, but certainly in the proposed year, year one of the LTP, there's a saving of $2 million or 0.29% of rates. Yeah.
Sorry, this is where I'm getting confused.
So you
Shut up. Is that what you're telling me to do, Sam?
can I?
No, I'm just trying to make it for other people like me out there, Sam.
Well, what happens is when we borrow under the general rate, we borrow as we need to borrow. And so the borrowing, for instance, hasn't arisen for some of the purposes of that heritage rate.
Yep.
But if we stick with the heritage rate, then we're just collecting it as though that borrowing had occurred in effect.
And
so,
it'll quietly stockpile itself until one day that we do need it.
and then it will catch up. So
Yes.
over time, it will all level out. But right at the moment, because when we only rate when we borrow, because we haven't borrowed, we don't need to rate as much. So it's really just a timing difference in the first year or two, and then it, I think in year 3 or 4, is it sort of evens out. About 6 it evens out, so it catches itself up. It's a timing issue, and it came from staff being asked to look to find savings, and this is a saving in an early year when the rates were higher than in later years.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
So, a couple of quick things here. Firstly, because we've already spent some money on the Robert McDougall and our City Otautahi, and the museum's already underway, would it be fair to say that some of the current amount that we've collected, which isn't very much, will have been expended already?
Yeah, it has. That's
Yeah.
correct, because it was also the municipal chambers.
Yeah, that's the OSA, our City Otautahi, yeah.
Yes.
We're in overdraft.
Yeah. Does it, because it sort of catches up and then we are effectively sort of saving some ahead of time for the provincial chambers, does that mean that we're likely to save interest costs in future years by saving for it now? Like, if you're waiting for it a little bit ahead of time, you're likely to actually be saving on interest costs for the borrowing that you would do.
Through you, Mr Mayor, through a strictly cash flow position, if you've got more than you've spent, then that's correct. But we've actually spent $18 million, well, counting this year. We'll spend about $10 million this year. We spent $8 million over the last 2 years, so about $18 million in total we've spent. The repayment of that is scheduled over 30 years, so yeah, currently it's sitting at about $600,000 for the first year of the long-term plan. Yeah.
Okay, and just the last one, if we fold this into the general rate, does it just mean that effectively the conditions on this one, which is what it is to be spent on, disappear, and that in the future there's no... So at the moment, because we collect it for specific purposes, it has to be applied to those purposes? Does it mean if we fold it in that it could be applied to other purposes?
So
if it's in there, it's in there. Yeah.
That's correct. So when it's a targeted rate, you can only spend it on those purposes. Understanding, of course, though, with the interest, so that's probably half the amount again, is being paid for by the general rate as we speak.
But does
because of work that's already been commenced, so that's already in play. It would be when we come up to the museum redevelopment, we haven't started work payment on that yet, so because that's not already in train, there could be some discussion around that at a future point. But because work has already commenced on those other projects, then they're already locked in.
Did we make it clear to people during the consultation, and especially with Heritage Advocates, that if it was folded in, because we consulted on folding it in.
Correct.
But did we make it clear at the time what the consequences of that would be, and that these specific heritage builds may not be funded through this anymore?
No, it was more of a tidying process, both for the rates and administration. There's no intent to not continue to do the work as this was initially signalled.
Thanks.
So they'll continue to be funded even if it gets rolled into general rate. That's what I think Sarah's saying. We don't want it to get lost.
So we could choose.
It's the work that... Sorry, I threw you,
But
Mr
we'll
Mayor.
save ourselves $2 million. Sorry, no, I butted in. No, Jake, you go, mate.
Thank you. Sarah's point's actually spurred one in my own mind. I'm supportive of this, but I just want to make sure that there are no unintended consequences. How much of a barrier would removing this rate be if we didn't want to do these works? I.e., could any council in any year remove and abolish a rate at any time anyway? Therefore, there's not much stopping them in either sort of direction.
It's a good question, Councillor, through you, Mr Mayor. So council can decide, to move rate, add a new add a new rate or remove one, but you'd consult with the public before going ahead and doing that. Like an LTP is the perfect time, but you could run a special process through an annual plan year, but it's up to council to set rates.
And presumably if we wanted to defer all of these projects or completely bump them off the capital list, we would have to consult on that anyway.
Absolutely, but understand that 3 out of the 4 projects have already commenced. So.
I know in this instance it's...
Okay, sure. Yep.
Yeah, it's just essentially it's just to follow up on Yanni's point around a bigger area rate like a Greater Christchurch rate that should include the heritage items that are of Canterbury value, provincial chambers, the arts centre. If anything happens to the cathedral in the future which requires more, then that would be in there. But obviously the OPEX are Te Kaha, so that we need a Greater Christchurch rate. So thank you for agreeing to bring that up at the Mayoral Forum, Mr Mayor.
Okay, Mayor's just asking Bruce a question. So someone please ask a question to use up some time. Come on. We're just getting a bit of clarity down the back there.
Just following on from what Aaron just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's all about you guys. The Greater Christchurch rate, maybe that's not a silly idea.
Andre.
I just thought if neighbours don't want to pay for a new stadium, I can't understand they'll be keen to jump on paying for 100-year-old buildings, but I'm keen to be proven wrong. Very keen to be.
They're their buildings too,
Yep.
and the same in Arana Park. I mean, there's a number of things that the Greater Christchurch rate. We've got to have the discussion. It's got to come in. Yeah. No, we need MPs to overwrite it. Then
Local Members Bill, Act of Parliament. We should have done this years ago. Don't know why we haven't. Just need to get on with it. If we'd put a levy like we did with the museum and the Arts Centre bill, we wouldn't be having this conversation now, right?
it's because we're an inclusive city. We want to include our neighbours in paying the bills.
No, but Mary's just actually asking a question that I asked a question of. So, oh, good.
It's a time.
If I'd asked a question, Sam would look at me as I was some sort of daft ass. And
We're only saving it in that year. We're not saving it overall.
Right.
It's a timing issue.
Yeah.
So it's a timing issue because we're
Ahead of ourselves.
because the heritage rate collects around about $2.6 million. But if it's under the general rate, we only have to fund the borrowings that have been made, and that's around about $600,000.
Cool. So that's where that number.
That's where that comes in. But of course, eventually the money has to be repaid. So under the general rate, it will go on a bit longer, and so on. So that's why you save in year one. So
So it's just re-spreading it across different years.
Is everyone generally happy with the recommendation? Yanni.
I'll just get clarity on
quickly, Russell, write that down.
we just got told. So effectively, in the long run, this costs us more.
No, through you,
No,
Mr Mayor.
because we collect $2.6 million a year. If we just, the sooner we collect the heritage money, presumably the sooner we can pay for the costs that we're incurring. If we're using the general rate, we're only rating for the borrowing cost. So over time, that will be a lot more.
No, it is still the same amount that you're borrowing, but as a responsible council, you shouldn't be collecting for money you're not spending. I think we learned that lesson in day one.
That's not the point,
Okay,
right?
right,
The
hang
point
on.
is whether we collect for borrowing or whether we collect for spending. We're currently collecting for spending. What the going into the general rate does is put it collecting for borrow. Is that? I've understood what
Through you, Mr Mayor.
Yeah,
No.
thank you, Russell.
We are collecting the rates for the borrowing of the amount to do the spending. So this rate only pays the principal portion of that borrowing, up to 77 million. The interest portion of that borrowing is being paid for by the general rate as we speak.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, next one, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the next one is